The first knowledge lecture begins with 4 lines. Heat and dryness, fire. Heat and moisture, air. Cold and dryness, earth. Cold and moisture, water. That's the entire first section. 4 elements, 4 combinations. It almost looks too simple to deserve serious attention. And that's why most people move past it too quickly. They memorize the associations, they learn that fire is hot and dry, water is cold and moist, and then they continue to the zodiac as though the first requirement had been completed. It has not, because concealed inside those 4 lines is a complete model of how forces differentiate from one another. The lecture doesn't begin by telling you what fire symbolizes. It doesn't say that fire is will, passion, purification, anger, courage, destruction, illumination, or transformation. Those associations come later. The lecture begins one level beneath them. It gives you the qualities from which fire is constructed: heat and dryness. This is the key. The elements aren't presented as 4 isolated substances. They are presented as combinations of qualities. The visible substance is the symbol. The combination is the formula. And the formula tells you how the force behaves. Before we go any further, let's remove one modern misunderstanding. When the Golden Dawn speaks about the elements, it's not attempting to teach chemistry. Fire, air, water, and earth are not being proposed as replacements for oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, iron, or any of the elements on the periodic table. The word element is being used in an older and more fundamental sense. An element is a primary mode through which force becomes manifest, a pattern of activity, a category of experience, a way energy organizes itself as it enters consciousness and form. Physical fire is one expression of the fire principle. The water in the ocean is one expression of the water principle. The soil beneath your feet is one expression of earth. The atmosphere surrounding you is one expression of air. But none of those physical substances exhausts the meaning of the element. The physical world gives you the image. Magical training teaches you to recognize the pattern behind the image. That distinction changes everything. If you understand fire only as physical flame, your relationship to it remains external. You look at the fire, you feel its heat, you observe what it does. But once fire is understood as a pattern of heat and dryness, you begin recognizing fiery activity in places where no visible flame exists. In a confrontation, in an act of courage, in a sudden decision, in sexual intensity, in ambition, in purification, in the destruction of an obsolete structure, in the moment an idea becomes strong enough to reorganize your life. No physical flame is required. The same pattern is operating. This is what symbolic consciousness allows you to perceive. The symbol stops being a picture of one object. It becomes an entrance into a category of force. But to understand that force accurately, we must understand the 4 qualities: heat, cold, moisture, dryness. These words sound familiar, but they're being used more broadly than their ordinary physical meanings. Heat means more than temperature. Cold means more than the absence of warmth. Moisture means more than something that contains water. Dryness means more than, oh, this isn't wet. At the practical level of the system, the qualities describe tendencies, ways a force acts. Heat mobilizes. It stimulates, accelerates, expands, excites, and sets things into motion. Cold restrains. It contracts, slows, consolidates, preserves, and draws activity inward. Moisture joins. It blends, connects, adapts, absorbs, and allows one thing to flow into another. Dryness separates. It distinguishes, defines, divides, hardens, and gives individual boundaries. These are practical interpretations. They're not meant to replace the exact wording of the knowledge lecture. They allow us to unpack what those combinations begin to imply for magical practice. Heat and cold form one polarity, moisture and dryness form another. One polarity concerns activity, the other concerns relationship. Heat increases movement. Cold decreases or contains movement. Moisture allows things to combine. Dryness keeps things distinct. And from the intersection of those two polarities, the four elements emerge. This is more than a list. It is a structure. Fire's hot and dry, active and separating. Air is hot and moist, active and connecting. Earth is cold and dry, stable and separating. Water is cold and moist, receptive and connecting. Now the elements begin to reveal themselves. Fire is not simply energy. Air is not simply thought. Water is not simply emotion. Earth is not simply the physical world. Those descriptions are useful but incomplete. The qualities tell you why those associations exist. Fire is heat combined with dryness, activity combined with separation. Something is energized, and through that energy, distinctions become sharper. Fire divides one state from another, before and after, pure and impure, living and dead, illuminated and concealed. Fire reveals because light creates contrast. Fire purifies because it separates what can withstand the heat from what can't. Fire destroys because it breaks apart existing forms. Fire creates because the destruction of one condition releases energy for another. This is why fire is associated with will. Will selects. It chooses one direction over another. It cuts through competing possibilities and says, this, not that. A person without access to fire may possess ideas, feelings, plans, but remain unable to convert them into decisive movement. Nothing ignites, nothing is separated from the field of possibility strongly enough to become an action. But fire in excess creates another problem. The separating power becomes indiscriminate. Discernment becomes hostility. Courage becomes aggression. Purification becomes obsession. Intensity becomes destruction for its own sake. The same force that allows you to act can make you incapable of receiving. The same force that illuminates can blind. This is one of the first laws the elements teach. A force is not good because it's strong. A force is useful when it is proportionate, directed, and balanced by the other forces required for the operation. There are moments when fire is exactly what's missing. There are also moments when adding more fire is the worst possible action. Magical skill begins with learning the difference. Air is heat and moisture. Activity combined with connection. Air moves, but unlike fire, it doesn't move primarily by separating. It moves between things. It crosses boundaries. It carries. Sound travels through it. Words move through it. Breath enters the body through it. Scent is transmitted by it. Air connects one location to another without becoming fixed in either. This is why air becomes associated with thought, language, communication, analysis, and relationship between ideas. Thought moves. It compares. It associates. It takes one concept and places it beside another. Language allows something inside one mind to enter another. Air creates networks. It forms connections across apparent separation. But air is not passive. It's hot. It stimulates. A single idea can move through a population faster than any physical object. A sentence can activate an emotion. A name can summon an entire field of memory. A symbol can connect the conscious mind to something that was previously inaccessible. This is air operating as a magical principle. It is thought in motion, thought communicating, thought linking, thought transmitting force. When air is deficient, movement between ideas becomes difficult. Communication becomes blocked. The mind becomes rigid. A person may possess knowledge but be unable to organize or articulate it. There may be experience without interpretation, information without relationship. But air in excess becomes endless movement without arrival. Analysis detaches from purpose. Curiosity becomes distraction. communication becomes noise. The mind generates connection after connection, but never allows anything to become solid enough to use. Everything remains possible. Nothing becomes real. Air can connect you to 1,000 ideas while preventing you from embodying any of them. Again, the element is not the problem. Imbalance is the problem. The purpose of training is not to become more airy, more fiery, more watery, or more earthy according to the personal preference. The purpose is to develop the ability to recognize, invoke, direct, and equilibrate all four. Earth is cold and dry. Containment combined with separation. Movement slows. Boundaries become firm. Distinct things maintain their identity. This is the condition required for form. A building stands because its materials resist movement. A body exists because a boundary distinguishes the organism from its environment. An agreement has force because its terms are defined. A ritual has structure because the actions occur in a particular order within a particular space. Earth establishes the limit that allows something to exist as itself. Without Earth, energy may be present, but it has no vessel. Ideas appear but are never written. Intentions form but never become habits. Visions occur but leave no lasting change. Plans remain atmospheric. Earth is what allows force to survive contact with material conditions. This is why Earth is associated with manifestation, because manifestation requires limitation. To make one thing real, countless other possibilities have to be excluded. A book becomes a book because particular words are chosen and all other possible words are left unwritten. A temple becomes a temple because a boundary is established between sacred space and ordinary space. A practice becomes real because time is given to it consistently rather than theoretically. Earth says this form, this place, this action, this boundary, this repetition. Earth exposes the difference between wanting transformation and building the conditions that allow transformation to occur. You can possess extraordinary aspiration and still be unable to maintain a daily practice. You can experience visions and still fail to organize your life. You can understand complex metaphysical ideas and remain incapable of completing basic work. Spiritual intensity doesn't automatically create material discipline. Sometimes it conceals its absence. Earth corrects that. But Earth also has its distortion. Stability becomes stagnation. Discipline becomes rigidity. Boundaries become imprisonment. Preservation becomes fear of change. The structure that once protected the work begins preventing the work from developing. Earth can hold a force long enough for it to mature. It can also hold a dead form long after the life has left it. The magician has to know when to construct and when to release. Water is cold and moist. Receptivity combined with connection. Water does not impose one fixed shape upon its environment. It receives the shape of the vessel. It joins with what it encounters. It moves toward depth. It reflects what appears above it while concealing what exists below its surface. This is why water becomes associated with emotion, imagination, memory, intuition, dreams, and the subconscious. Water receives impressions. It retains traces. An experience enters consciousness and continues moving below the level of deliberate thought. A word spoken years ago can remain active in the emotional body. A symbol encountered in ritual can descend into the unconscious and continue reorganizing material long after the ceremony is ended. A dream can connect present experience to something the conscious mind believed it had forgotten. Water joins moments across time. It allows boundaries to soften enough for contact to occur. This is essential to magic, because the magician cannot work through will alone. Something also has to receive. An image has to be allowed to form. A presence has to be perceived before it can be interpreted. The unconscious has to become responsive to the symbols introduced through ritual. The operator has to develop the capacity to enter a state without immediately forcing it into predetermined shape. Water allows depth. It allows contact. It allows transformation to occur below the surface. But water without boundary becomes inundation. Receptivity becomes suggestibility. Empathy becomes loss of self. Imagination becomes fantasy without discrimination. Emotion becomes a current that carries the operator wherever it moves. A person may feel everything and understand nothing. Every impression is accepted. Every internal image is treated as revelation. Every mood becomes a message from the universe. That's not magical sensitivity, that is unfiltered reception. Water requires earth to contain it. It requires air to interpret it. It requires fire to test and direct it. Each element reveals the necessity of the others. This is where the system becomes more interesting, because the elements are more than 4 personality types. They're more than 4 teams. You're not meant to select the element you like and build an identity around it. I'm a fire person. I'm naturally water. Oh, my element is air. That language can be useful at a very superficial level. It becomes dangerous when it turns into an excuse. The person who identifies with fire may use the symbol to justify aggression. The person who identifies with water may turn emotional instability into spiritual sensitivity. The person who identifies with air may mistake intellectual movement for actual development. The person who identifies with earth may call fear of change stability. The elements are forces to be studied, and the element you resist may tell you more about your training than the element you enjoy. You contain all 4. You require all 4. Every effective magical operation contains all 4 in some proportion. Fire provides the activating impulse. Air provides the idea, formula, or communication. Water provides receptivity and imaginal contact. Earth provides the structure through which the result can become established. Remove one and the operation changes. Fire without water can't receive correction. Water without fire can't direct itself. Air without earth can't remain. Earth without air can't adapt. The oppositions are also exact. Fire and water share no quality. Fire is hot and dry. Water is cold and moist. Fire activates and separates. Water receives and joins. Air and earth also share no quality. Air is hot and moist. Earth is cold and dry. Air moves and connects. Earth stabilizes and distinguishes. This is why the opposing elements can feel so difficult to reconcile. They move in contrary directions, but that opposition is not an error in the system. It's what makes equilibrium possible. Balance doesn't mean reducing every force until nothing remains. Balance means establishing a relationship between powers that would otherwise dominate one another. Real equilibrium is dynamic. Fire remains fire. Water remains water. Neither is erased. The tension between them becomes organized. This is one of the deeper implications of elemental training. The goal is to develop a structure capable of holding contradiction consciously. You can act decisively without losing receptivity. You can remain open without surrendering discernment. You can maintain structure without becoming rigid. You can think expansively without losing contact with reality. That is elemental balance at the human level. Capacity. There's another detail hidden inside the fourfold structure. Every element shares one quality with 2 other elements. Fire shares heat with air. Fire shares dryness with earth. Air shares moisture with water. Water shares cold with earth. This means that one element can be transformed into another through a change in a single quality. Fire becomes air when dryness gives way to moisture. The force remains active, but separation becomes connection. Air becomes water when heat gives way to cold. Connection remains, but activity becomes receptivity. Water becomes earth when moisture gives way to dryness. The force remains contained, but fluid connection becomes fixed distinction. Earth becomes fire when cold gives way to heat. Definition remains, but stability becomes activation. This gives us a model of transformation. You don't always correct a condition by attacking the entire condition. Sometimes one quality has to change. Suppose a project is filled with air. There are ideas, conversations, possibilities, research, and connections, but nothing has been completed. The problem is not necessarily that all air must be removed. The project may require dryness, definition, exclusion, a boundary. The moment a single possibility is selected and given form, the operation begins moving toward Earth. Or suppose the situation has become excessively earthbound. The structure exists, but it's no longer alive. The rules are intact, the schedule continues, the form remains, but no energy moves through it. The work may require heat, not the destruction of all structure. The activation of the structure, Earth begins moving toward fire. This way of thinking is more precise than saying, I need more energy. What kind of energy? More activity? More connection? More receptivity? More definition? What is actually absent? What is excessive? What quality needs to be introduced? What quality needs to be restrained? This is how the elemental system becomes diagnostic. And I don't mean that in the clinical sense. It's not a substitute for medicine, psychology, or material analysis. It's a symbolic method for examining the pattern of a situation, and it applies first to the operator. There's an important distinction here. Understanding the elements intellectually is not the same as developing an operational relationship with them. You can memorize every attribution in the Golden Dawn system. You can know the correct colors, directions, divine names, archangels, weapons, and astrological correspondences, and still remain at the level of information. The change begins when the symbols are placed into motion through repeated ritual practice, because ritual forces the knowledge out of abstraction. You go beyond reading that fire corresponds to activation and separation. You stand inside a deliberately constructed space. You trace the symbol. You vibrate the divine name. You build the image. You direct attention. You observe what changes in the atmosphere, in the body, and in the structure of your consciousness. This is where the material starts becoming real. This is also why I created the Mage Space Golden Dawn Magick course. The course takes the foundational rituals of the Golden Dawn and presents them in a guided video format, so you're not left trying to reconstruct the entire operation from fragmented written instructions. You can enter the practice, follow the ritual as it unfolds, and begin building the repetition that the system actually requires. Because the greatest obstacle for most students isn't a lack of interest. It's the distance between reading a ritual and confidently performing it. The course is designed to close that distance. I'll place the link below for anyone who's ready to begin working the system rather than only learning about it. But before we continue, I want you to observe something about yourself. Which element currently feels most developed in your life? And which element do you constantly resist? Fire, air, water, or earth? Put both answers in the comments. Don't choose the element you think sounds the most powerful. Choose the one your actual behavior reveals. Your answer may tell you where the work needs to begin. Observe how those forces already behave inside you. What happens when you become angry? Does fire produce clean action or indiscriminate destruction? What happens when you receive a strong impression? Can water hold it without immediately declaring it true? What happens when the mind encounters uncertainty? Can air explore the possibilities without becoming lost in them? What happens after inspiration? Can earth establish a practice strong enough to carry it forward? These questions reveal the condition of the instrument performing the ritual, because the magician doesn't stand outside the operation. The magician is one of its primary components. Every invocation passes through the existing structure of the operator. Fire moving through an unbalanced personality will not necessarily appear as purified will. It may intensify aggression, compulsion, or pride. Water moving through an unbalanced personality will not appear as intuition. It may amplify fantasy, dependency, or confusion. Air may produce brilliance. It may also produce fragmentation. Earth may produce manifestation. It may also deepen inertia. The element doesn't arrive inside an empty vessel. It enters a living system with habits, memories, desires, defenses, and unconscious material. Elemental training begins the process of making that vessel observable. This is why balance comes before power. People are attracted to the idea of invocation because they imagine adding force to themselves. More energy, more magnetism, more will, more perception, more influence. But additional force doesn't automatically produce additional control. It magnifies the condition already present. Power moving through disorder can produce more disorder. The Golden Dawn curriculum doesn't begin with unlimited invocation. It begins with classification, recognition, memorization, equilibrium. The student learns the forces before attempting to wield them at depth. That sequence is protection. You must know what you're contacting. You must know how it behaves. You must know what balances it. And you must have enough self-observation to recognize whether the operation is clarifying you or simply intensifying an existing distortion. This is the practical meaning of the first 4 lines of the knowledge lecture. Heat and dryness, fire. Heat and moisture, air. Cold and dryness, earth. Cold and moisture, water. Don't memorize them as 4 disconnected answers. Visualize the structure. Heat above, cold below. Moisture on one side, dryness on the other. Fire at the intersection of heat and dryness. Air at the intersection of heat and moisture. Water at the intersection of cold and moisture. Earth at the intersection of cold and dryness. See which elements share a quality. See which elements oppose one another completely. See how changing one quality transforms one element into the next. The goal is to make the pattern immediate. When you hear fire, heat and dryness should arise within you. When you hear air, heat and moisture. Water, cold and moisture. Earth, cold and dryness. Because the qualities prevent the symbols from becoming vague. Anyone can call anger fire. The trained practitioner asks, what is activated? What is being separated? What is being illuminated? What is being consumed? What is being purified? What is the force moving? What balances it? Anyone can call emotion water. The trained practitioner asks, what is being received? What is joining with what? What boundary is dissolving? What has descended below conscious awareness? What vessel is containing the experience? What would allow the impression to be interpreted accurately? The symbol becomes a method of questioning, and the questioning makes perception more exact. This week, don't attempt to master every elemental correspondence at once. Begin with the formula. Observe the qualities directly. Find heat that isn't physical heat. Find cold that isn't physical cold. Find moisture operating as connection. Find dryness operating as distinction. Watch what happens when a conversation becomes heated. Watch what happens when a relationship becomes cold. Notice when an idea begins connecting previously separate areas of your life. Notice when a boundary allows something to take a definite form. Don't force the interpretation. Observe, record, compare. The purpose is to train the mind to recognize pattern beneath appearance. That capacity is essential because later the elemental symbols will appear inside rituals, grades, pentagrams, weapons, colors, divine names, archangels, directions, and an entire system of correspondence. But all of those later attributions rest on the first distinction. How does the force behave? Does it activate or contain? Does it connect or separate? Heat, cold, moisture, dryness. The ancient model survives because it gives the mind something usable. A symbolic grammar of transformation. 4 qualities, 4 combinations, 4 elemental modes. And from those 4 modes, an enormous portion of the magical system will be constructed. This is the first pattern the neophyte is asked to internalize. Because before you can direct a force, you have to recognize it. Before you can balance a force, you have to understand what opposes it. And before a symbol can become operational, it has to stop being a picture. Fire is more than the flame. Water is more than the ocean. Air is more than the atmosphere. Earth is more than the ground. Those are the doors. The element is what moves through them. And now you know what to begin looking for. The first knowledge lecture gives you a map, but the map was created to be traveled. The Golden Dawn system was never intended to remain a collection of correspondences that you study from a distance. The symbols are meant to be visualized. The names are meant to be vibrated. The forces are meant to be encountered. And the rituals are meant to be repeated until the structure begins establishing itself inside the operator. That's the purpose of the Mage Space Golden Dawn Magick course. It takes you through the rituals in a guided video format so you can stop postponing the work until you feel as though you understand everything perfectly. You don't need to master the entire symbolic system before beginning. The understanding develops through practice. The ritual teaches you things that commentary cannot. Repetition reveals relationships that remain invisible on the page. And eventually, the actions that once felt unfamiliar begin to acquire weight. The names begin to mean something when you vibrate them. The symbols begin to produce recognition before the intellect explains why. The ritual space begins responding differently because you are entering it differently. That transition only happens through work. So if you've been studying the Golden Dawn but have not yet developed a consistent ritual space, the course gives you a clear place to begin. The link is below. Begin with the foundational rituals. Work them consistently. Allow the system to prove itself through direct experience rather than asking belief to do the work that only practice can do. And if you want me to continue unpacking the knowledge lectures at this level, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.